Welcome to the 2024 Vice Presidential Debate here in the United States. Hi, I'm TJ Walker, coming to you from the TJ Walker Success Channel. We're going to do something a little bit different here tonight. I will be analyzing the communication skills of J.D. Vance, the Republican nominee for Vice President, Tim Walz, the Democratic nominee for Vice President. Couple of disclaimers. This is not a journalistic organization, so I will not be fact-checking anyone in real time. I will be analyzing their communication skills. Now, we're going to do things a little bit differently today. We're going to be not just getting my analysis and opinion based on 40 years of training politicians on how to speak effectively, working with political figures, executives, CEOs, presidents of countries, prime ministers, Nobel Peace Prize winners. But we're also going to get the analysis of a digital clone communications coach. That's right. I'm going to be introducing you to a clone of myself. This is a digital clone that has ingested everything I've ever said about public speaking skills, communication skills, media training skills, and it will be giving its analysis as well. We'll go ahead and get the clone all ready here, and it's just an experiment. We'll see how it works. It may provide new insights. It might not. We will, in fact, find out. So I'll be giving you my opinion, and my digital clone will be giving you its opinion as well. And you'll see it here in just a moment. It's on standby and will be giving us feedback. TJ, do you see the screen all right? Are you ready to have a fun time analyzing the vice presidential debate?
Absolutely. I can see your setup clearly. You've got a bright studio light and 2 monitors, which should make for a great analysis session. Let's dive into the debate and see what insights we can uncover. What's the first thing you want to focus on in the debate?
Okay, let's tune in and look at this in real time.
Civil debate. These are the rules that both campaigns have agreed
We'll pay
to.
attention to what
Questions
the
will be
CS
directed at
moderators
one
say.
candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get an...
And I should point out, I'll be stopping and starting, so we won't quite be live throughout, but we'll be near live time, so you won't miss anything here.
Another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel.
So Tim Walz getting off to a slightly shaky start. Now, Tim Walz is seen generally as a very strong communicator, powerful advocate for his campaign and the Harris campaign on cable television. But these are the first few seconds that a lot of people are seeing him on the largest audience he's ever had. A lot of ums popping out, a little bit of stammering, tripping over a word. It's very early, nothing that's a fatal flaw, but a little bit shakiness right out of the gate. Let's watch more.
Surveillance proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, to Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to be able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today is, we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator.
Okay, TJ Klone, what did you think of Tim Walz's opening presentation, his opening remarks there?
Tim Walz's opening presentation was quite strategic. He set a strong tone by addressing key issues directly, which can resonate well with the audience. His delivery was clear, and he maintained a confident demeanor, which is crucial in such high-stakes settings. How did you feel about the way he handled the initial questions?
Okay, I'm going to differ slightly. I think he became more confident as it went on. The first 20 seconds or so, a few more uhs and ums, tripping over a word here and there. I thought his strongest point was mentioning that it wasn't just Democrats saying that the opponent was weak and unfit for military service, but the former president's own chief of staff. And right out of the gate, he talked about how J.D. Vance, the Republican nominee, had been extraordinarily critical of the head of his ticket. That's going to be something I think we're going to see again and again and again. Let's watch more and see what J.D. Vance's first comments are. Gershwin has stopped by to say hello and asked the question, has TJ's Klone been prepping for this debate? No, it is not. I'm getting a lot of echo in your feed, by the way. Yes, unfortunately, I don't know how to fix the problem of the feed, because if I use my earpiece, which I normally would, then my clone wouldn't hear it. So it's just an unfortunate byproduct of this being the first time that we're doing this live analysis of the vice presidential debate, where I'm providing analysis as well as my clone. And I should point out, for those of you who've never seen this before or seen me, I'm a longtime political consultant and media trainer for candidates. I'm not involved with any campaign this year, and I'm not coming at this from an ideological perspective, but from a pure communication standpoint. But I've been giving analysis of presidential debates, vice presidential debates, political candidate debates on network and network affiliates since the 1980s. So I'm kind of an old hand at this. My clone, this is the first time. It's a debut. So let's watch more.
Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit, because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I will try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to...
Okay, TJ Klone, I want to give you a chance to give your commentary first. What did you think of J.D. Vance's performance in his opening statements? And let me go ahead and get our wider screen on here. Okay, TJ, let's hear your analysis.
The visual setup you've described is quite effective for a virtual meeting. The man in the suit has a professional backdrop with the plant and shelves, which adds a touch of warmth and personality.
And I should point out, excuse me, TJ, I should point out for people just joining us, this is my digital clone, so it does not know who everyone is. It is just giving sort of a neutral, objective analysis based on how I have fed it with my own insights on communications training. So, TJ, again, back to the man you saw speaking, who was J.D. Vance. Give us your assessment of what you thought he did well as a communicator, and if there was anything you didn't like or thought was a sign of weakness.
In the visual setup you described, the split screen format might be a bit distracting.
And I apologize, TJ. We can't judge the candidates based on the backdrop or the setting. They had no say-so over that. So if you could just limit your commentary to what the candidates said, how they looked, how they moved, how they sounded. Begin.
The visual setup with the person holding a tablet and the C-SPAN broadcast is quite dynamic. However, the split screen might cause where it's most needed. How do you feel about the current balance between the visual elements and the message you're trying to convey? The visual setup you're describing with the news broadcast and the smaller screen showing another person is quite layered. It's essential to ensure that the primary...
I'm going to have to hold it a little bit differently. So I messed it up by the way I held it. Now, let me give my analysis of that. I thought J.D. Vance came across very, very strong in his opening statement. He talked about himself, gave a little biography, but he did it in a way that didn't sound like a typical politician who just says, I'm going to ignore what you asked me and say whatever I want. He kind of acknowledged he was going to introduce himself first, reintroduced himself to people who knew him, and came across very compelling, clearly articulate, none of the stammers, and I don't mean to pick on Tim Walz too much. The occasional ums and uhs he had, tripping over a word, are very minor. It's early in the debate. But Vance came across flawlessly. He didn't do anything that would strike the average person as unlikable or rude. He looked pleasant. He looked engaging. the lighting on his face. We're here to be superficial, folks, because that's part of what this is about. Superficially, he looked good. He is a much younger man. He's 20 years younger than Tim Walz. His blue eyes were, in fact, piercing. People have commented on that before. They got the lighting just right on him. Very neat appearance. So I thought overall he did come across well in his opening comments. Let's continue.
Respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headache. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance.
So very strong performance by Tim Walz there. He's doing what vice presidential candidates are supposed to do. He is attacking forcefully the nominee of the other party. He marshaled his facts in a very aggressive manner. He seems more confident now. He had some early jitters in his very first answer. Now he's coming across, he seems to be hitting his stride. He's coming across articulate, hitting the opponent in areas that most fair-minded people would say is fair. The Twitter responsiveness, the fickleness. These are well-worn themes that have, in fact, resonated with voters before. So pretty strong second effort on his part. Let's see where J.D. Vance goes with this.
The U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary.
So one of the things all candidates do is they have to face their expectations. Tim Walz has downplayed his own expertise as a communicator and basically said, oh shucks, I'm just the country guy without the fancy Ivy League degree. And so he's focusing on that particular bit of imagery. J.D. Vance has a bit of a smart aleck reputation, a lot of flippant comments about cat ladies, things like that. So far, we've seen him not look smug at all. There's no smirks. There's no cuteness. There's nothing that shows any sarcasm. Both candidates, with their body language, their looks, their facial expressions, have been respectful of the other candidates so far. So that's pretty much a wash at this point. Let's watch more of his response.
You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Okay, so let's hear from the TJ clone. How do you analyze that last sequence from the speaker you saw? Let's go ahead and hear your analysis of how JD Vance did in that last answer.
J.D. Vance's last answer was a bit of a mixed bag. He had a strong presence and maintained eye contact, which is crucial for engaging the audience. However, his message seemed a bit scattered, lacking a clear, concise point. The lighting in the setup was also a bit harsh, which can distract from the content.
And forgive me, TJ, we're not going to critique the candidates on their lighting. They have no control over that or the backdrop. If we could limit our commentary specifically to their answers, their body language, their movement, and the substance of what they're saying, if you could focus your commentary on that. Now, please continue with your commentary of the last speaker, J.D. Vance. Okay, I may have talked it out on that one. We'll continue. I thought J.D. Vance did a little better than the clone did. I thought he was, again, forceful, clearly articulate. He is coming across as intelligent and intellectual without being egg-headed. He does have a degree from Yale Law School, but is not using big words. Neither candidate is. They are speaking in simple, understandable terms. And J.D. Vance, to his credit, did point out, if you want to talk about foreign policy, then Trump is the last president where essentially there were no wars or major wars during his tenure, which is a fair point that does in fact resonate with a lot of people. Henry stops by and says hello and says, thanks for bringing the debate live. Henry, thanks for joining us. Let's watch more.
Thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger.
It's a minor thing, but I do think it is interesting that you see Tim Walz sort of head down, and I can't exactly hold it against people who have less than perfect heads of hair, but he's looking down, making notes, pursing his lips a little. He doesn't look like he's having as much fun as J.D. Vance, who seems to be simply standing there and looking comfortable and listening. Yet we're very early in the game. That is not something that gets a debate called for one over the other. But it is interesting that visually J.D. Vance looks a lot more comfortable. Let's watch more.
Stronger and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. And these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally, in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, that the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. And then you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Okay, we're going to stop right there a minute and ask the TJ clone, what did you think of that particular sequence where J.D. Vance was speaking about the economy? Let's go ahead and pull you up, give you full screen.
J.D. Vance's discussion on the economy is a great opportunity to analyze communication effectiveness. When you're speaking about complex topics like the economy, clarity and structure are key. It's important to break down your points into digestible segments, using relatable examples to connect with your audience. How do you think Vance's delivery impacted his message? Did his body language and tone support his points effectively?
Well, I'll ask the questions, TJ, but I think he did a pretty good job there, because this issue is an issue that typically cuts against one particular political party, and he was not defensive at all. J.D. Vance is clearly someone who is articulate. He is fairly new into politics, but one of the beauties of being new in politics is that he just came off of a campaign a couple of years ago where he did about 12 debates, major debates in his state of Ohio. So he does have a lot of relatively recent experience debating, and he clearly seems very, very poised and is doing what I and others who coach politicians to do when you're debating is you're not defensive. You're saying what's good about your team, and you focus on your accomplishments, your positive vision, and you then make specific pointed comments criticizing your opponent. That is standard debate practice. What I am sensing already, though, is he looks more comfortable and relaxed than Tim Walz. Again, Tim Walz hasn't done anything that really stands out as awkward. There's no memorable moment similar to George H.W. Bush glancing at his watch against Bill Clinton with the look on his face like, when is this going to be over? There's been no blunder like that. But so far, J.D. Vance does look a lot more comfortable and relaxed. Henry says, I really appreciate the use of the video clone in the analysis. Much appreciated, TJ. Gershwin says, someday might we not just have AI clones that are the vice presidential running mates? Well, that's a discussion we can have another day. You may be on to something. There is a school of thought that says artificial intelligence itself is going to destroy even the possibility of democracy. And if you want, we don't have time to go into it now, but I would recommend you read the book Nexus by Yuval Harari, the famed Israeli historian who looks at that very issue. But we'll have to talk about that at another time. Let's go back into the debate. We're almost live time, but we are stopping and starting as we give ourselves time and the clone time to analyze.
Close to an agreement, because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane, and my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together to solve the governors and the emergency responders on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem. Donald Trump called it a hoax, and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sets in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They see 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We're producing more natural gas and more oil at any time we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay, we're going to ask
to respond there.
TJ Klone what he thought of that. TJ, give your analysis of how Tim Walz, the last speaker we saw, presented there. Give us your analysis.
Tim Walz's presentation style is engaging and confident. He maintains a steady pace, which helps in delivering his message clearly. His use of gestures complements his verbal communication, adding emphasis to key points. However, he could benefit from varying his vocal tone more to keep the audience's attention throughout. Practicing on video and reviewing his performance could help him refine these aspects. What specific elements of his presentation stood out to you?
Okay, so I thought that Governor Walz was pretty forceful. He hit a lot of points. He reminded everyone that he has a lot of farmers that he represents and works with, and giving people a sense that he's the Midwestern guy who is calm and reasonable. He hit a lot of his talking points in a way that seemed relaxed. I don't like the way he used the word mitigate. As I always tell my clients, please mitigate the use of the word mitigate, because it sounds too much like what a lawyer or a risk analyst would use. But I would give credit to both of them thus far, in that they both are avoiding jargon. They're avoiding government speak. Tim Walz served in the Congress for 10 years, and now J.D. Vance is a senator. Neither one of them is talking about, Senate bill this, HR 1, and they're not using technical jargon. They're both speaking in a pretty plain, clear, well-spoken way. So the one thing I did think that Tim Walz did well is he got that zinger in there, reminding people that the nominee for the other party, when talking about these massive hurricanes and disasters, made jokes about this making more beachfront property. For people who already don't like the nominee of the other party, this resonates very, very well. And it was a strong point. Let's see how J.D. Vance does in response.
President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership.
Here's
And
my
the real
analysis.
issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We have built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years. Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator, your time is
it.
up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Okay, look, we're going to pause
Producing more
there.
natural gas.
And TJ Klone, let's get your analysis of what you thought of J.D. Vance's response right there. We'll give you the screen.
J.D. Vance's response was quite strategic. He effectively highlighted key points that resonate with his audience, focusing on economic growth and energy independence. His delivery was confident, maintaining a steady pace and clear articulation. However, he could enhance his impact by incorporating more personal anecdotes to connect emotionally with viewers. Practicing on video and reviewing his performance could help refine his message and delivery. What specific aspect of his
Okay.
response stood
So
out?
you can see that my clone is programmed to remind people to practice on video. So I realize that can be a little tedious sometimes. I do think that J.D. Vance is coming across in a very confident way. He's articulate without necessarily looking overly slick. That is one of the criticisms of him in the past, that he came across as the slick know-it-all. And he's toned that down very well so far. It's still early in the debate, and there's a lot to go. But overall, I thought he came across as clear, focused, hitting his points. Now, he's doing something there that those of you who are regular viewers of politicians notice, and you probably don't like. He didn't really answer the question. The reporter, the news anchor, specifically asked him, "What do you have to say about the head of your party calling climate change a hoax?" He deflected that. Now, he still dealt with the issue of the environment. It wasn't like he all of a sudden started talking about foreign policy, but he deflected, he answered the question obliquely and went on to what he wanted to say, which is pretty much standard fare for politicians. You have to do that. The art is in the subtlety of how you do it, and if you can do it in a way that doesn't seem too obvious to most people. Let's take a look at the rest.
There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil, but the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure we're protecting by burying our power line?
I do think that Senator Vance is smart in that he's just politely looking at his opponent when his opponent is speaking. The head of his party, his boss, got a lot of criticism for sort of never looking at his opponent in recent debates, kind of looking disdainful, smirking. J.D. Vance has come across as just polite looking, and it may be hard to tell, but I can tell he has a slight smile on his face, which is in fact what media trainers around the globe recommend to politicians and others who are in the media. A little bit of a smile on your face can make you look relaxed and more comfortable. As you can see, just right here, he seems to have a little bit of a smile on his face. So he doesn't look bothered. He looks completely relaxed. Tim Walz, on the other hand, there's some grimaces coming up. Again, nothing that's fatal, nothing that's going to make all the commentators say, well, Tim Walz clearly lost tonight. It's nothing like that, but there's a little bit of pursing of the lips, looking down. He just doesn't look as comfortable on stage. But as far as the verbal messages coming out of both of them, they're both executing pretty much as planned, no major mistakes. They're operating at a pretty flawless pace so far. Let's take another look.
It's how do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, Your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations, and that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than the minimum wage in our country. And by the way, that would be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you asked about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them, hopefully, are homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is, unfortunately, Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember, when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Okay, we're going to get the perspective from the TJ clone on how Senator J.D. Vance answered that question there. So, clone, go ahead and share your analysis.
Senator J.D. Vance's response in the debate was strategic. He focused on emphasizing the need for stricter immigration policies, aligning with his party's stance. His delivery was assertive, aiming to resonate with voters concerned about border security. However, he could have strengthened his argument by providing more specific examples or data to back his claims. This would have added depth and credibility to his position. How do you think his approach might impact voter perception in the upcoming?
So, I thought it was about as good of an answer as he could give. Again, he didn't really answer the question. The question was specifically, you've got someone in the country who is illegal, but has had children here. The child is now a legal citizen. They were born in the United States. Are you going to take the migrant who is here illegally, kick them out of the country, and have their 10-year-old wander the street or whatever? He didn't really answer that question. But he did, again, make a very forceful case for the policies of his party, policies of his nominee who was in power before, and went on the attack. You might not want to hear this. It might not be a good thing for democracy, but it is in fact true that the best thing you can do in a political debate is attack the opponent, the opposing political party, but to do it in a way that somehow resonates with undecided voters. Because here in the United States, we're in a very polarized situation. Only a tiny percentage of voters are undecided. These debates are about trying to affect undecided voters. And of course, there's the issue of mobilizing and exciting your base, but they're trying to convince undecided voters. I will also give J.D. Vance credit for talking about tough policies, forceful policy, and doing it in a way where he doesn't seem angry, he doesn't seem vengeful, he's not coming across as nasty. So he's doing it in a softer style, and he particularly softened his image there, reminding people that his own mother had a drug addiction problem. So he's making himself relatable because there are tens of millions of Americans who have close family members who've either had a family member die of a drug addiction or suffer severe health problems because of drug addiction. And it is typically unusual at this level of American politics to have a politician who has an immediate member of a family to be associated by that. So I am going to give him some credit for that. Corey says hello. Corey says, thanks, TJ, for bringing us this. And thank you so much for stopping by, Corey. By the way, any of you watching have a question or your own perspective, your own analysis of how either candidate is doing, happy to share other perspectives. So let's now take a look at the next answer.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of the specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things?
Yeah,
regarding
well,
children?
the drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to
Here's my analogy.
Kamala Harris was the Attorney General
Just
of the largest state, a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know he's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol say this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents. Detection for drugs. DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senate.
Okay, TJ, let's hear your analysis of Governor Tim Walz's response there. What did you think of it?
Governor Tim Walz's response seems to focus on the impracticality of the proposed deportation plan, highlighting its unworkability. By labeling it as laughable, he aims to undermine the credibility of the plan and its proponents. This approach can resonate with audiences who view the plan as unrealistic or overly harsh. However, to strengthen his argument, Walz could benefit from providing specific examples or data to illustrate why the plan is unfeasible. This would add depth to his critique and potentially sway undecided voters. How do you think this approach might influence public perception?
I will point out my own analysis so far. Nobody has really made a knockout blow. Nobody's had a defining moment in the debate yet. Now, there's a lot of debate left. Both men have pretty much articulated their case in a forceful way, a way that would have been planned and expected. Both of them have made the charges against the opposing party in a way that is fairly standard that they've already done on the campaign trail. So we haven't seen anything that is really the gotcha moment, the soundbite moment that's going to define headlines so far. Governor Walz is making a good case, but he doesn't seem quite as articulate. I'm not suggesting that is going to hurt him, but if you were to look at a transcript of what he said, there's some incomplete sentences. Now, some of the best communicators in the world, recent presidents, several of the most recent presidents, you could make the case, speak in a similar way. J.D. Vance is speaking, in some ways, he's more like the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, who is, by all accounts, across party lines, is considered one of the most articulate politicians of his generation. J.D. Vance is coming across as more articulate. Now, that's not what defines debates or decides who's necessarily going to win. Governor Walz there is making the point, and it's been made by a lot of candidates for his party, that on the issue of immigration, the point he's making is true. The Democrats endorsed basically all the policy proposals of the Republicans, and at the last minute, the head of the Republican Party told people, don't vote for this because I want a campaign issue. The question is that too much insider baseball? Is that too obscure the nuts and bolts of campaign process or political process? Does that convince anyone? And I think we'll find out a partial response to that right now by listening to the response by J.D. Vance. Let's listen in.
Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country, and we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming in.
So here I'm seeing Tim Walz look a little nervous. He's kind of looking down. He's quickly looking up. His face, you can see there's no slight smile on his face. Now, we're talking about serious issues. Someone could make the case, well, why should you smile if you hear something you think is factually untrue or damaging to the country? But he looks much, much less comfortable than J.D. Vance. A lot of people have already decided whether they like or don't like these two candidates. One of them has a much, much higher public approval rating than the other. But this is sort of a fresh start for a lot of them. This is the first time many Americans have really looked at either candidate. And for others, it's the first time they've seen them since the Republican and Democratic nominating conventions where they were introduced to the world. In this case, I would say Tim Walz is looking less comfortable. There's the head motion, the quick head motion, the look of sort of like, I can't believe what this guy is saying. Now, you might like that response, but it is a contrast from J.D. Vance looking relaxed, completely confident, and poised. He's looking like he's winning the debate. Again, he hasn't won it yet, but he is doing a better job at this moment of projecting confidence and doing it in a way that doesn't come across as arrogant or obnoxious.
Our country. And now she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed, it's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true, don't do it. There's consequences for this. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve it.
So here, Tim Walz is talking about this story where during another debate, the head of the other party suggested that migrants and people from Haiti and other countries were taking the dogs and cats of people in Springfield, Ohio, and eating them. What Governor Walz is talking about here right now is he's accusing J.D. Vance of spreading this misinformation. But he's doing it, he's trying not to repeat the negatives and the slurs, but he's doing it in a way that's a bit opaque. I'm not sure someone who's just tuning in who didn't pay attention to the last debate knows what he's talking about. So there's always a fine line between, do you repeat every negative thing your opponent says when trying to remind people that they said things that you think were disingenuous or damaging to the Republic? But I think the way he's describing it here is a bit vague. I'm not sure he's landing the punch. Let's see where he goes from here.
This if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help.
So I do want to point out there are some certain stylistic differences between J.D. Vance and the head of his party. He's very careful, for example, to correctly pronounce the name of the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris. He doesn't mispronounce, certainly doesn't intentionally mispronounce his name. So he's going out of his way to not annoy people across the political spectrum. He has received very harsh negatives from some of his speeches, talk show appearances, especially things he said in the past, in the last 5 years or so, and certainly in the last 10 years, regarding the head of his own party. And he's going out of his way, I would suggest, to come across as very mainstream, non-threatening, non-annoying, and he's softening his image. He's not coming across as harsh here at all.
Most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I said in Springfield.
So again, I am struck by Tim Walz sort of quickly, just the quick turn and almost like a scowl. And let me point this out for people who haven't been to media training. When your face, if you're over the age of 20 and your face is blank and there's a TV camera on you, this is what happens. It looks like a scowl. I'm not scowling, but it looks like a scowl. So what media trainers do and political consultants do is they recommend to politicians have a slight smile on your face. Not a gigantic, big, toothy grin, but just a slight smile. But we're seeing again and again this side shot of Tim Walz, this frown. It's not flattering. He doesn't look happy. He doesn't look joyful. And one of the things that he has had going for him in the campaign, certainly at his convention, and on a lot of TV appearances, he seems to be a joyful fellow, a happy fellow, an upbeat fellow. He's the coach. He's the coach giving the pep talks. And his looks, the quickness of turning his head, He's turning his head at a stronger angle, and the bit of the frown, or what appears to be a frown, doesn't make him look as relaxed and comfortable as J.D. Vance has so far.
Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have.
So it is kind of a nice, I mean, they're both being gracious, saying, you're fine. It's the person at the top of your ticket, which is not an uncommon thing for vice presidential nominees to talk about. But they're both extending a little bit of graciousness to the other person and making it seem like there's no direct personal animosity between the two, thus making them seem likable. J.D. Vance is continuing to do a good job of never being defensive and instead pointing out what he believes is good about the positions of his own party and the weaknesses of the other. Very good. Corey writes, I believe your clone did an excellent job of answering the question, including saying more depth was needed, alluding to the fact that J.D. Vance did not answer the question. Now, I'll leave it to others to decide if the host or the moderators are somehow asking questions that favor one candidate or the other. What we have seen so far, specifically on several occasions, is J.D. Vance is quickly sidestepping the question, reframing it, answering it on his own terms. That's one way of saying it. You could also say he was just dodging the question. We'll see as more and more questions come up if Tim Walz feels the need to do the same thing.
1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up.
So here's something that, on the one hand, is understandable. On the other hand, I don't know if it's really helping him. Tim Walz is starting to sound exasperated. And intellectually, you can make a good case that perhaps he should be. I don't know that it's coming across well to undecided voters. And if you look at him sort of like, I can't believe I have to say this, versus just the screenshot we have here of J.D. Vance looking, little smile on his face, relaxed, poised. He looks like he's having a good time. And Tim Walz just looks exasperated, kind of like, do I have to really be here talking to this guy? That's my take so far. Again, there's plenty of time left in this debate. I do not by any stretch think that it's somehow over or that one candidate has done something that is going to define the debate yet. Let's watch more.
Not dealing with it, blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making that less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree, it should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it.
Here's my analysis.
It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield,
TJ
Ohio.
Clone, what did you think of how Governor Walz did right there? Let's hear your assessment of how Governor Walz did in that brief answer right there.
Governor Walz's response was strategic, focusing on the impracticality of the deportation plan. He aimed to undermine its credibility, which is a smart move in a debate setting. However, to strengthen his argument, he could have provided specific examples or data to back up his claims. This would not only enhance his credibility, but also make his points more relatable to the audience. What do you think could have been added to make his response more impactful?
So I think that, again, the answer wasn't bad, but I just get the sense that his frustration is coming out with his facial expressions, with his tone of voice, and that typically doesn't play as well with viewers, with voters, with undecided voters. Now, I am struck by, frankly, how relaxed J.D. Vance appears. And Tim Walz is not doing anything as far as like shaking or jittering or playing with a pen or he's not getting an eye twitch or something like that. But he definitely does not come across as if he were as relaxed or having the time of his life. Let's watch more.
Does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status. Senator, we have so much to get to.
I think it's important because the rules were that you guys wanted to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you could go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border one. That is not a person coming in applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been
much.
in the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We want to have
that has not been on the books.
Okay, quick comment there. J.D. Vance did something that is a little bit risky because you can seem rude, you can seem too hostile, you can seem obnoxious, talking over moderators, in this case, two women. But I thought he did it in a fairly polite way. And he came across like he's just wanting to get the facts out. He didn't do it with anger. He didn't do anything demeaning in his commentary to the host. He certainly didn't tell anybody to shut up. So if you're going to interrupt and talk over someone, that's about as good a way as you could do it. You could make the case he went on a little too long, but he appeared to be putting out facts that he thought were important in a straightforward way that were not just political hash, just talking points, but seemed to be substantive points. So I give him credit. If you're going to interrupt, it's risky. He did it in a way where I don't think he created a lot of ill will. Let's see if that sequence continues. Again, we're with you. This is almost live. We started live with everyone else, but we're stopping and starting. I'm giving my analysis. My digital clone is also giving analysis. Let's watch more.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you.
Okay, so now there's something fun that happened. You could hear it I could hear it. You perhaps couldn't. Part of the rules with CBS in this debate is that the moderators can mute someone. Once their time is up, they're not going to fact check them, but they are going to mute them. In that particular case, J.D. Vance continued to talk. You could tell they muted him, and you could just hear it background where his audio was feeding into the mics of the host, but in a way that was pretty much inaudible. So that's perhaps going on too far. Let's see if either one of them continue that, because that can be highly annoying.
Because your mics are hot. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process.
Corey writes in, TJ, it's amazing that the TJ clone in both of the commentary responses knew that candidates did not provide specific examples. I'm glad you noted that.
Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
So again, I'm going to point out, I think that when Tim Walz is being spoken to by the host, by the moderator, by a woman, and he's looking down, piercing his lips, taking notes, it just seems like he's working too hard. It's not the best look. Now, again, far be it for me to comment on someone not looking flattering, looking down to see the top of the head, but Tim Walz has got kind of the same hairline I do. And believe it or not, well, this may be easy for you to believe, he is younger than I am. It's not the best look. When the host is talking to you, I believe the moderator, you should be looking right at them rather than writing everything down, because this is not a law review exam. This is a debate where it's theater, and part of it is your style, part of it is your substance. I think he's harming himself. Now, these are minor points, but he's harming himself by constantly looking down, looking away, not having a smile on his face. Let's watch more.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs.
I think that right now, Governor Walz is speaking just a little too quickly. Now, I can understand him, you can understand him, but he doesn't seem as relaxed and conversational as we've seen him many times on other TV appearances, cable news, even his acceptance speech to the Democratic Convention. I don't know if at this point he's feeling like, the debate's half over, I better get my points in more. That can happen to candidates. But when you rush, you seem less comfortable, less confident, and it can give the impression sometimes, falsely or fairly or unfairly, that you think your opponent is winning. I'm not hearing J.D. Vance rush yet. It's a subtle thing, but I am detecting a slight pickup in the speed from Tim Walz. Let's watch more.
$5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I see it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by a third. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took Pope to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, and give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top guys. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just have the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by.
So one of the interesting things about the debate so far is the contrast between this and the last presidential debate. Both candidates have pretty much stuck to their plan. They've delivered message points positive about their own platform, their candidates, the person at the top of the ticket, and they've delivered pretty much standard criticisms of the opposition. What we've not seen yet is any really sharp jabs. There's no sound bites, gotcha moments attacking the other person or the other party. There's also, based on my own ear, nothing that's going to jump out as some major faux pas. There's no major blunder. There's no soundbite that the media is going to latch on to and say, wow, this is the moment where the candidate fell apart and all hell broke loose. We've not seen that yet. It's been a pretty straightforward, dare I say, conventional debate thus far. Let's watch more.
By 5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear.
I will point out again, just when the moderator is asking J.D. Vance the question, he's looking right at her. He has a little bit of a smile on his face, and he's not doing anything nervous. He's not glancing down. He's not writing notes. He just seems very, very poised, relaxed, and confident. Let's see how he answers.
A lot from Tim Walz this evening. You just heard in the answer a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds.
So his speaking speed continues to be relaxed. J.D. Vance is not rushing. He sounds conversational. He sounds comfortable, and he doesn't in any way seem relaxed or nervous. He seems relaxed.
Pretty good. Here's what you won't hear is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years, she had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border, and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now, not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense, and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies to deliver the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts, but if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond?
Okay, I'm going to ask the clone to give analysis of that. Clone, before you speak, this time I will give my opinion, and that is I do think that J.D. Vance was really very forceful there, and for people who like that message and buy it, they found him completely compelling there. It was forceful, it was articulate, it was smooth. It may be that the biggest criticism of him is that he's too smooth. I mean, Mitt Romney used to get that criticism. Bill Clinton used to get that criticism, that somehow he's too slick. But I think that he's doing it in a way where he does not come across as condescending or like a smart aleck. That was a very, very forceful answer. TJ Clone, now give us your analysis.
Governor Walsh's performance during the debate.
No, sorry. I'm not asking for Governor Walsh. I want you to analyze the last speaker you just saw, which was J.D. Vance. Please give your commentary of him if you can.
Governor Walsh's performance was notably poised and
Okay, so
articulate.
we had a slight hiccup there. So that's a part of the technology. Those of you just joining us, here's what we're doing. I'm TJ Walker. I have been a media trainer, presentation skills coach for 40 years. I have worked with political candidates, presidential candidates. I've worked with presidents of countries, prime ministers, Nobel Peace Prize winners, members of parliament around the world. And I have often done debate prep. I've also done debate analysis and analysis of political speakers and presidents on CNN and Fox and MSNBC and other major networks. Tonight, we're doing something a little different. I'm not only providing my analysis, but my digital clone is giving analysis. You hear all the time about how AI is taking over the world. Well, it may be taking over my job as a speech analyst because it's starting to right now. I'm having my own digital clone, which has been programmed by my training, my books, my courses, to think like I do and to give answers as I do. So we had a little glitch right there, but we're going to continue analyzing the debate where you get my analysis as well as the clone. Let's watch more.
Well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things, we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years? In the last year as president. That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
So, pretty solid answer. Tim Walz is making his case. These are standard arguments against the former U.S. president who's, again, running for his party's, received the party's nomination and is running for the general election, pointing out the fact that the former president didn't pay taxes for 15 years, hitting a lot of standard arguments that have resonated well among Democratic voters and moderate voters. It traditionally has not cut much with undecided voters and people who sway elections. So it is interesting to see neither candidate at this point really seems to have put forth new messages specifically designed to be attractive to that tiny sliver of the electorate that is seemingly undecided at this point. Let's see how J.D. Vance responds.
You say trust the experts, but those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class.
I'm going to get my clone to analyze this because here Vance is going into economic populist messages that worked well for him in his Senate campaign and is something that's very much a part of his political party's message now. So I want to make sure I'm capturing that so we can get an analysis. I'll give you my analysis. In fact, I haven't done this yet today because I didn't want to slow us down, but I'm going to just back up because I want to catch all of that because I do think that this is an important part of the messaging of this particular vice presidential candidate.
Want to undo the Trump tax cuts.
TJ, watch
What's
this.
so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and we saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to
And
that? What has
I went back too far. So TJ Clone, ignore that part. We're going to go to, let me fast forward just a minute, because I didn't want to get this part again. I wanted to get to J.D. Vance's economic populist message. So
There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it,
so
and that's
TJ,
what we want.
disregard this.
Governor, you say trust the expert.
Okay, here's the part I want the clone to analyze. So TJ Clone, please analyze this particular bit of messaging.
But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. And I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much. I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator,
Okay, so there was a tremendous amount to unpack there. I'm going to give the first whack at this to my digital clone. Let's hear your analysis, TJ Clone, of what J.D. Vance said right there.
J.D. Vance's remarks highlight a critical shift in economic thinking. He challenges the long-standing belief that outsourcing manufacturing benefits the middle class. By advocating for the return of American manufacturing and energy independence, Vance taps into a populist sentiment that resonates with many who feel left behind by globalization. His focus on domestic production and energy aligns with concerns about national security and economic stability. This approach could appeal to voters seeking tangible solutions to economic challenges. What specific aspects of Vance's message do you find most compelling?
So I won't say compelling, but I will say to a lot of his audience, that is a compelling message. The economic nationalism, the economic populism is in fact something that has animated his political party now for quite some time, certainly since the emergence of the head of his ticket when he first announced he was running in 2015. And Vance made a very forceful and articulate, passionate case for that form of economic populism. Now, we don't have the time to bring in Paul Krugman, another economist, to dissect that. So that's not the purpose of this. We're here today to really analyze the communication skills. And I think Vance did communicate his economic populist message in an extraordinarily forceful way. And for many people, this does define a primary reason for why they're supporting the head of that ticket and why they are breaking from orthodoxy of that, what that party's had for a generation. So an important message. This is frankly why I do believe that the head of the ticket selected J.D. Vance to be on the ticket, is to forcefully articulate these messages to not only the base, but to undecided voters. He explained the rationale for his economic policy in a way that didn't get, he didn't start talking about famous, obscure Austrian economist. He didn't start talking about the Laffer curve, all sorts of obscure things that some politicians, he didn't start talking about the gold standard. He spoke in a way that was understandable to pretty much any voter, making a strong case. Again, totally aggressively positive without being in any way defensive. The other thing he did there, reminding people in a way that didn't seem obnoxious, at least to my ear, that he's got 3 kids and one of them is 2 years old and he wants them to be in bed. And in a time when people were so tired of the current United States president and the head of the other ticket running right now being in their 8th, 9th decade of life, reminding people that this guy has 2-year-olds is really driving home this point of youth and energy. And Tim Walz is younger than I am, so far be it for me to suggest he is too old for anything. But I think Vance is clever in driving home this reminder that he has young kids and is in fact, very young. He just turned 40 in the last month or so. So the other thing that Vance did there was clever. He used the word hate. Using the word hate as a politician is a tricky thing because it can make you come across too harsh, angry, nasty. It's easy to generate more negatives when you talk about it, but he did it in a way where he didn't seem hateful. Very, very clever there. Let's watch more.
Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
If you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look.
So Tim Walz, to me, here he looks exasperated. Now, you can make a firm intellectual case that he should feel exasperated, but I'm not quite sure it's a good look. Now, he doesn't look scared. He hasn't done anything really awkward. He certainly hasn't walked off stage or forgotten what he was going to say. He didn't have that look of being lost the way a certain incumbent president did in the first presidential debate this year. But he does look annoyed and exasperated. I'm not sure that's helping him with undecided voters.
I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it in my community, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right-to-work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks.
So talking about right-to-work states, people who really follow politics carefully know what that means. But I think he's losing the message with some of his voters. He's talking about a specific law that makes it tougher for unions to have power and influence. But it's jargon that a lot of non-political insiders are really not familiar with. So I'm going to take a few points off there for using that sort of rhetoric, because I think he's getting a little overwhelmed with all the things he wants to do to rebut what J.D. Vance is saying. And he's lapsing into some jargon that isn't necessarily as persuasive as it could be.
Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just in out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the Solicitor General that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a
Okay, so that was pretty crafty. I gotta tell you, J.D. Vance was pretty clever there. He listened to this is what you want in a debate in order to score points. You have to react to something the other person said. So he reacted to something that Tim Walz said, tried to wrap it around, put new packaging on it, do some attack, put Governor Walz on the defensive, and at the very same time, sell a positive message and humanize himself. He did that in under 60 seconds, I believe, right there, talking about his own humble background, how his mother had to sacrifice healthcare to put food on the table. So he's coming across as compassionate, like he's in favor of helping people in need. I'm going to leave it to others to fact check this, whether they think his economic policies will do that. But again, he's following a framework where he looks composed, confident, relaxed. He's attacking the opponent. He's saying why what he thinks he's doing is good, what his party's doing is good, what their accomplishments are. And then he's sort of spray gunning 5 different areas of attack. And what that's doing is putting Tim Walz kind of on the defensive. You can just see he's kind of like, oh, where do I even start? He looks a little frustrated. Let's see where he goes with this.
Conversation on healthcare then.
Senator Governor,
Please.
thank you, Margaret.
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics, but right now I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, the folks out there didn't get at the top of this. Look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier, or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Okay, so that was a little bit confusing. Well, I've already talked about how J.D. Vance has dodged several questions. That certainly seemed to be like a dodge that Tim Walz did, but it didn't seem to be as artful. He was asked specifically, you said you went to China in spring of '89 to see Tiananmen Square, but news reports said you didn't go till August. Which is it? I think I listened pretty carefully. I didn't see an answer there. He did say at one point something that I think is a little bit unusual to hear a politician say. He said, I can get caught up in the rhetoric. I believe is his quote. That's kind of an odd thing for a politician to say. It's almost like confessing to saying the wrong thing. Now, he could have said, yes, I looked at the record. I misremembered. I didn't go to all, if that's what happened. He could have also said, I looked at my passport. I see the passport was April 2nd, 1989, and NPR got the story. He could have done either one of those things. but I'm going to take off a couple of points. Again, it's not the defining moment of the debate, but that was not the most artful dodge. Let's see what J.D. Vance has to say about that, or if they go on to the next issue.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I said.
Okay, so now he's saying he just misspoke. He would have been better off saying that right from the beginning, rather than seeming like, I better not talk about this. If you want to say you got something wrong, you're better off just saying it right out of the gate.
So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Okay, he seems a bit uncomfortable here. It's kind of like, oh, you got me. I wasn't expecting a follow-up question. So there's a bit of awkwardness, and now you see he's going much slower. It's not a defining moment and a debate, but it's not his best moment either.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler.
Okay, here's where it's going to get interesting. I'm going to bring up our clone here, because this is something extraordinarily rare in American politics, where you have a political candidate running as the vice president for someone at the top of the ticket, and they have said things that even the typical politician's worst enemies wouldn't say about it. So they're about to grill him on this. Let's see how he does. Flexi writes in, hello, TJ, it's Flexi here. I'm really enjoying watching your stream. Maybe we could discuss your stream schedule and team up for some gaming. The only game I know is Galaga from 1981. So I'm afraid I'm not much of a gamer. But Flexi, thank you so much. Let's get some analysis going right now of what appears to be, what could be the toughest question for J.D. Vance. So we're going to bring up the clone, get the analysis going here, and we're going to play this because I am interested in the clone's perspective of how J.D. Vance handles these tough questions.
Here's my analysis.
Okay, so TJ Clone, I want you to listen to this question asked of J.D. Vance, and then I want you to give us your analysis of the substance of his answer as well as the style. Let's bring him back up here starting now.
I know you said, you've been asked many times, and you said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Mark, because I've always been open, and sometimes, of course, I disagree with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record, but most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration in the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if there were Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator,
Okay, so TJ Walker clone, I want to hear your perspective on this. There's a lot to unpack in that message. Tell me what you thought of the substance and the style of J.D. Vance's response there.
J.D. Vance's response is intriguing. Substance-wise, he navigates the delicate balance of supporting Trump while maintaining his own distinct voice. He acknowledges Trump's economic achievements, but also hints at a willingness to offer candid advice, which could...
I think I actually hit something and I messed up. TJ, if you can continue there, I think I actually touched something, but you were giving some pretty good commentary there. If you could please continue.
J.D. Vance's approach is quite strategic. He manages to support Trump while carving out his own identity, which is crucial in maintaining voter trust. His style is confident, yet he remains approachable, which is key in political communication. This balance could potentially sway undecided voters who value both loyalty and independent thinking. How do you see this affecting his relationship with Trump?
So I thought, let me say right out of the gate, sometimes people hear me say, this person did this thing well, this other person didn't. They automatically assume, oh, that's who I'm for, or I'm in the tank. I've been accused throughout my career, just because I said something good about a particular politician in a debate, that I'm in the tank. So believe me, I am leaving my own perspective aside for this and trying to give it to you from an objective, neutral communication standpoint. I thought J.D. Vance's answer there was very clever. He said, hey, I screwed up. I was wrong, and that's why I now. So he segued perfectly. He admitted he was wrong without seeming defensive. And Tim Walz had the opportunity to do it just a moment ago, and he danced around the whole issue, and only when pressed did he say, he sort of imply he made some kind of mistake. So there is an art form to admitting you're wrong as a politician and doing it in a way where it just floats away because it's unmemorable. And in this particular case, J.D. Vance did it. This is perhaps the toughest issue for him because he has repeatedly said numerous times extraordinarily harsh criticisms of the head of his party and the top of his ticket in a way that even the strongest Democrat has not accused the head of the Republican Party. And he kind of just danced away from it right there in a fairly elegant way. He did it by saying he was wrong. He changed his mind. He changed his opinion. And that's a clever thing to do because it appeals to his own base. And yet liberal, open-minded people would say, well, that's a good thing when you change your mind in general. They might not agree in this case. But again, he came across not defensive at all, very comfortable, totally positive on his brand, on his party, on his nominee, and in a way that didn't seem like he was dodging the question. So I'm not seeing any clear-cut knockout here, but I am starting to see when you're judging a boxing, and this is not boxing, this is something really important. You're judging on points. I am starting to see at this point, we're more than halfway over, that J.D. Vance is making some headway on points. Not a knockout yet, but he's definitely winning a lot of small points here and there with his answers. Let's watch more.
Your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He bragged about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks, she has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duval, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not what, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. The Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to get more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this.
So, strong personal moment. Governor Walz talked about this during his nomination convention speech, that he and his wife had to go through fertility treatment. So humanizing himself, talking about his own struggles, always a good thing for politicians to do this. This has been an issue that most pundits would suggest have helped Walz and his party as the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade and other rights people had for abortion in the country. So he's making his points in a fairly traditional way. We'll see in a moment how J.D. Vance handles this.
Is well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about healthcare. And in Minnesota, we are ranked first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
So Tim Walz saying we trust women, we trust doctors. I do think that is a message that resonates with voters. He said that in a forceful way. A lot of strength, a lot of conviction, no looking down, no hesitation, no stumbling over words. One of his key message points, he hit that one well. Let's see how J.D. Vance does.
No, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually...
I have to say, J.D. Vance is speaking in a compassionate way here. He's not coming across as a know-it-all. He's not coming across as condemning and calling people immoral. He's talking about people he grew up with, talking about women who felt like they had no choices other than to terminate their pregnancy. So earlier criticisms of him have been that he's too harsh, he's too slick, he's too much of a smart aleck, too quick to sort of flash around that Yale law degree. He's coming across pretty compassionate here and not like an elitist. which has been one of the concerns and part of his image that he's had to try to rehabilitate. So far, he's off to a very, very strong start in this answer.
Very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple of years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had an abortion.
So again, interesting, different from a lot of what politicians in his party do. He's talking about he's specifically loving someone who had an abortion. Now, I'm not suggesting no one else in his party has ever done that, but he's coming across conversational, likable, relatable, talking about real people and not just theoretical rights. So far, a good answer.
That it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do.
So this is a very interesting answer, talking about how he and his party have to work harder to gain trust from the American people on this issue. Now, this is an issue that in the last few election cycles has very much hurt politicians in his party. So just stating their clear-cut position on this issue of abortion rights has not been a winner. So it's a very crafty sort of shifting of messages of how they have to work harder to earn trust. Comes across as earnest, sincere, humble, and less moralistic. I've not heard other members of his party really talking about this issue this way. So this is a slightly different tack J.D. Vance is taking, and it would certainly appear to be something that could resonate with undecided voters because he's not coming across as harsh and holier than thou and dictatorial.
I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. In California.
So again, this is a very interesting message from J.D. Vance. He's talking about, I'm in favor of fertility and we're pro-family. Really stressing positive messages. He's not saying the things that a lot of politicians and political figures on his side of the aisle have typically talked about of, this is murder and this is killing and this is horrible and this has to be banned. So he's really softening the message on this issue, not coming across harsh at all.
California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Well, the question you got asked, Donald Trump made the accusation it wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that they're the diverse state. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restricted state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own?
So, great personal anecdote here, talking about Amber Thurman, a particular woman who died because of access to abortion, having to travel. So it's good that he's talking about personal examples. This is something that I think might be ridiculed a little in the next Saturday Night Live when Jim Gaffigan, the comedian who's portraying Tim Walz, plays it up for a laugh because his eyes are sort of bugging out here. He's talking about, now he wants to be demonstrative and show how strongly he feels. That's a good thing, but his eyes are kind of bugging out here. And I'm not sure it's really the best look and that it's quite fitting with the seriousness of the topic. Let's watch more.
Body is determined on geography. There's a very real chance had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world.
So now this is interesting because Norah O'Donnell, the CBS anchor, is throwing back specific words that J.D. Vance has used in other interviews. It's the most barbaric country in the world. He's traditionally used very, very strong, forceful, ideological language. We're not seeing that tonight. He's definitely softened his image and tried to come across as more inclusive and less ideological, more moderate, more mainstream. Let's see how he handles this.
My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Laura, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did during when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not. Though I know the Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that's changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned.
So this is intriguing here. Once again, J.D. Vance is talking about how he's changed his position. Now, I'll leave it to others to figure out if that's sincere or if he in fact has. But the way he's speaking makes him seem eminently open-minded, eminently moderate, reasonable, mainstream, non-ideological, and flexible. So he is stressing these themes. You have to assume it's because his pollsters and others have said, we've got to go after this narrow sliver of 1 or 2% undecided voters who aren't interested in ideological extremes. So he's doing a very crafty and clever job of appearing to be mainstream, centrist, moderate, and flexible with answers like this.
And pregnancy is something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we've got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications.
Okay, Governor Walz just made a classic blunder in the debate. You don't repeat the negatives of the others. I'm going to respond to being pro-abortion. No, we're not. So people hear pro-abortion. They don't hear the no, not. They're hearing it again. They heard it the first time when Vance mentioned it. Now hearing it again when Walz is talking about it. So psychologically, the mind is processing pro-abortion twice. Anytime you're telling people what you aren't, you're losing. Anytime you're defending in a debate, you're losing. This is an area where Walz should be going on the offensive, talking about, because he and his party have a position that is acceptable to the vast, vast majority of the electorate, as well as the undecided. He shouldn't spend his time on the defensive. I don't think it's a horrible blunder. It's another couple of little points. It's not a gigantic blunder. But strategically, anytime you're defending and repeating other people's negatives, you're losing in a debate.
Are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
Let me respond to that. First of all, Governor, I agree. Amber Thurman should still be alive. There are a lot of people who should still be alive, but I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the...
So again, interesting, and that J.D. Vance is really coming across very compassionate. He wishes this woman were still alive. So he's doing an excellent job of coming across as a reasonable person, a compassionate person, a non-ideologue, a mainstream, flexible person. And more importantly, he's not defending himself and his party in his positions. He's not repeating negatives, whereas Governor Walz has done that. Let's see where he goes.
Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, that's not pro-choice or pro-abortion. That is fundamentally barbaric, and that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen. Do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. Please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something that this is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all. Was I wrong, Governor? Please tell me, what was that about the way the law is written? Look, I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been misread, it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business. On this. Things work best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that...
So Walz is on stronger ground here, talking about, mind your own business, give power to women. This is something that resonates with a lot of American voters and independent voters. But he seems annoyed here, and he seemed a little defensive. Like, I can't believe I'm having to defend what this guy is saying about this. So it is a classic debate blunder of letting the other person put you on the defensive and then explaining why they're wrong. When you're explaining why your opponent is wrong, you are losing. He's getting back a little further to the right place of trying to reframe the issue of you're either in favor of women controlling their own bodies or there's other version. But he's looking awkward. He almost had a disjointed sentence there that seemed like he was trying to process, how am I going to get through this and back on track? He didn't look quite as comfortable. You can just see from the freeze frame there, his face just doesn't look relaxed and comfortable the way J.D. Vance does.
Child born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So that hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget, Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on. We're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate in just a moment.
Okay, so we're gonna fast forward through this part
The CBS News Vice President.
and
You've got
get
folks
brought
that
up.
won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and I here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an Attorney General, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed the shooting. I'm sorry about that. And I appreciate it. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said.
So this is a good moment by, well, I thought they both did well. Governor Walz spoke in a very eloquent way and a compassionate way. And what J.D. Vance did right there is also an important thing. He showed he was actually listening to what his opponent was saying and showing some compassion and said, hey, I didn't know your 17-year-old witnessed an assault or murder. I'm very sorry about that. So I thought he came across very genuine. Now, who really knows what's inside the mind of either politician or any politician? But a nervous politician, a less experienced politician, a less sure-footed debater is so focused on what am I going to say next? What's my next thing? They're looking down at their notes. Vance was comfortable enough, confident enough to truly listen and to be able to add to the conversation referencing something Tim Walz said. That was an important thing.
About Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think in our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those San Diego parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is, talking about cities and where it's at, the number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns, and there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Everyone, thank you.
So one of the things that does strike me about this debate is really how different it is compared to recent presidential debates and presidential debates from 4 years ago and 8 years ago. You might not like one or even both of the candidates, but it's a fairly rational debate it's fairly linear. There are two articulate people here speaking, and it is kind of a strong contrast from what we've seen in recent presidential debates. Let's look more.
You, Margaret. Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. First, let me say this issue of how.
He's making a mistake. No, it won't do that. You should not spend time rebutting premises from the host, the anchors, the moderators. You shouldn't be spending time rebutting charges from your opponent. Simply state things in a positive context, and you'll come across much better. We're going to get commentary from the clone in a minute and see how he does on this. Again, these are not fatal flaws by Tim Walz. These are minor losing a point here or there. So let's get another analysis of exactly how he's doing and what we think from a somewhat objective artificial intelligence perspective, specifically my clone trained by my own recording. So TJ Clone, take a look at what Tim Walz is saying here and give us your analysis in a moment.
And I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in it, making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance, I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it different. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis as an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we get some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up.
Okay, we're going to get commentary from the TJ Clone now. TJ Clone, give us your analysis of what you thought of how Tim Walz did in that answer right there.
Tim Walz's response was a bit of a mixed bag. He maintained a calm demeanor, which is crucial in high-pressure situations like debates. However, his answer lacked specificity and didn't fully address the core of the question. It's important to provide clear, concise points that resonate with the audience. He could benefit from tightening his message and focusing on delivering impactful sound bites. Practicing on video could help him refine his delivery and ensure his message is both
Well,
compelling
TJ, I think he has practiced on video, but some commentary there. I do think that he scored certain points by reminding people he's owned one house in his life. So he really is someone who has more in common with most voters. His net worth, I believe, is a couple $100,000, whereas J.D. Vance grew up very, very poor with a parent who had drug addiction, other issues, series of male figures in his life, but a very unstable early childhood. But now he's a fabulously wealthy person worth 8 figures, $10 million plus. Book deals, movie deals. He's someone very, very successful venture capitalist, salaries for many years. So he makes a lot of money, infinitely wealthier than Tim Walz. So that was a chance for Tim Walz to sort of remind people that he has a lot more in common. He knows what a home is to most Americans. It's the one thing you've got. Sometimes it's the only thing that can really hold you together. So a lot of good things coming in to that answer. I'm still slightly struck by the fact that there's a certain stumbling, stammering. He starts with a sentence, it doesn't quite finish, and goes off to another. Now, the American voters don't seem to care about that. Certainly when you look at the head of J.D. Vance's party, you analyze the sentence structure of what he says, very few of them seem to be real sentences, and yet it resonates. He resonates with a lot of American voters, enough to capture a party nomination 3 times in a row. So I'm not saying that's the definitive issue, but when you looked at the two, clearly J.D. Vance, by traditional measures, is smoother and more articulate. Doesn't mean he's going to win the debate, but it is one metric worth looking at. Let's look at the rest of the response.
Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs aside from illegal immigration is, think about it, if a truck driver is paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build a house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer where? Governor, we'll get to you in a moment. But Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the Vice President is letting in migrants.
You're going to give that back, because I guess we agree not to fact check. I'll check it. Look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find a solution. I was going to ask on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the country we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments that gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Betty, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up, but Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify, there are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot.
So Vance is escalating his rhetoric here. He's using words like regime, wants to throw people in jail. So he's bringing out a slightly harder edge as we head in to the final third of the debate. He's come across as very sort of warm and cuddly up until now. Let's see where he goes from here.
A lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. That in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you, gentlemen. We have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. It's very simple common sense. I think it's Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress. You're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. You think about healthcare, you go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice, and it will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations.
So Vance is sounding articulate here. He's sounding intelligent. The problem is the broader context of the issue. It's not particularly satisfying to anyone who's paid attention to this issue. Donald Trump is famously said, I'm against Obamacare and I'll have a better plan. Well, that was 9 years ago. He really has never, ever, ever come up with a plan because he doesn't want to endorse something like Obamacare. He doesn't want to say Medicare for all. And he doesn't want to say, let's just have the status quo. Well, those are really your only choices, according to pretty much every healthcare expert in the world. So Vance is doing a great job of sort of dancing around this and talking about incremental things. We'll see how Tim Walz responds to this, because this is an area where there can be strong valence as a political issue that can cut sometimes with independence. Let's take a look.
Relations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done, but when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gets you history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a
See, he's using initial ACA. Yeah, a lot of people can figure out that that's the Obama healthcare bill. But in general, you should not be using initials and acronyms. The rule of thumb I have for candidates and people I work with is, other than FBI and SCUBA and maybe IRS, don't use initials, don't use acronyms. J.D. Vance doesn't seem to have used any all night. Hasn't hurt him.
major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is, under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants you. Go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill.
I got to say, this is just too complex of an answer. He's going into all the history. He's continuing to use this phrase ACA, which a lot of people just don't know what that means. He's talking about all the political machinations. He needs to be much clearer in just saying that with his party's plan, tens of millions of people are getting health care. With the other party, they're not going to have health care. They're going to die. He needs to paint a more vivid picture of black and white. He's getting lost in all of the nuance. He's talking about the legislative ins and outs, talking about his history being there when the legislation was created. He's getting lost in the weeds here. And what he should be doing from his position as a Democratic vice presidential runway is really attacking forcefully how people could, in fact, die if Obamacare is taken away, if that's what the Republicans, the opponents, do if they regain office. He's getting lost in the weeds.
Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that will be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kid would have never given me that.
So this was really the strongest point. He should have led with this. He said, look, after being on the national stage for a decade, for saying that Obamacare is the worst possible thing in the world, to now, a decade in, the head of the other party is saying, I have a concept of a plan on how people with health care. Struck a lot of people as laughable. That it's something that Walz should have brought up right from the beginning and ripped really hard into his opponent. He kind of got lost in the weeds.
But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They're figuring they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris.
Okay, so this is a tricky issue for any candidate, especially Democratic candidates, is you start talking about all the intricacies of why Obamacare is better than other options and what the problems it solved. It's wildly complicated. It really doesn't work very well in a national TV debate. Walz would be much better off talking in broader, sweeping terms about what his plan does to help people, what the other side does that could really harm people and result in death and debt. He's getting lost in the weeds here.
First, will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president, inflation was low, take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now than we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this is young people, whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And the Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then you think the individual mandate's a good idea. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I hear people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying healthcare once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret,
Can
of course, I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret, let's start.
about families in America. There isn't child care.
I will say things have been remarkably civil so far, very different from some recent presidential debates. Both these men are from the Midwest. They seem to pride themselves in being collegial, being polite, and we have seen that pretty consistently.
Should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. We're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some cases, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take care of our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business.
A lot of good points that Walz is making here. He does seem to be less comfortable in a TV studio without an audience where he's really looking at people, because he's not looking at the host, he's looking at the camera, and his eyes have a bit of a bug-eyed look about him, and it's not as comfortable as J.D. Vance's.
Paid leave program, and if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they're home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats too have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look,
Interesting, he's trying to come across as bipartisan, moderate, and centrist again.
who's an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also
Mentioning his family, making himself more personable.
being a working mom, even for somebody with all the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult for
Showing compassion for working moms.
family leave because she worked for a bigger company, but the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in a way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice and how we deliver.
Get completely consistent, smooth, non-threatening, and coming across as mainstream, moderate, and flexible. Kind of the new J.D. Vance, not what a lot of, at least Democratic voters, are used to thinking of with respect to his image.
That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs.
Hitting economic nationalism, again, one of the key points that has traditionally resonated well for his party and the head of his party.
We're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Tim Walz just does not look comfortable, relaxed, or happy to be here. I do think that plays a factor in things.
The child care shortages, we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's 5,000 or 6,000, that leaves you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarship types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But
So here's the problem. Tim Walz is trying to be so nice. So we're not that far apart. He's agreeing with him all the time. That's not his job. His job is to create contrast, to give people a reason to vote for the Democratic candidate against the opposition. And he's not driving up those negatives. That was his job. And he's just coming across as sort of nice and likable, but it's not really accomplishing what he needed to do.
more workers because our economy is growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Laura, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable.
Okay, now we're hearing a real dodge. And this is not something he wants to talk about.
Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully, and on January the 20th, what
So interesting that he's actually bringing up January 6th.
happened? Joe Biden became president, Donald Trump left the White House, and now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country. And
So an attempt to pivot away from January 6th and the head of his ticket refusing to acknowledge the results of the election in 2020. Let's see how this plays
The
out.
last 4 years and the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bob.
Interesting, stressing his bipartisan nature, being raised by Democrats.
Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. Of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind the basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues, and that to me is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate. I think there was a lot of commonality here, and I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator. But there's one though, but this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day. Some of the American.
Okay, so this is some compelling stuff, talking about January 6th. Police officers beaten at the Capitol, 140 of them.
Flags. Several later died. And it wasn't
Several died. He kind of understated that.
just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hey, Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country.
So this is very compelling. This is deep into the debate. We're towards the end, but this is very, very powerful stuff. Finally, Tim Walz seems to be a little more passionate and hitting strong themes that really go to the heart of why the other party should be rejected.
Good part.
Margaret?
Senator Bates, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We're going to shake hands after the...
Now that's some good spin to say that Donald Trump peacefully gave up with all the machinations that took place, all the lawsuits, the demagoguery. That's rich, and he said it with a straight face without laughing. I'll let you decide whether that's good or bad, but that is a clever way of positioning this issue.
This debate and after this election, of course, I hope that we'll win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think of revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got.
January 6th was not Facebook ad. Now that's a strong, forceful soundbite that could get play after this debate.
To this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance, I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. This is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just say, did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala?
So interesting. This is something Walz probably should have done a lot earlier, which he's turning to Vance saying, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? And on the first pass, J.D. Vance took a pass and just said, I'm focusing on the future. So that's something that is an inartful dodge. Let's see where he goes from there.
Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
Now that's a strong answer. That may be a soundbite that lives on past the initial coverage.
Damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to threaten the power of the government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another.
So Vance is doing an excellent job of changing the topic. Let's see where Walz goes from here.
Argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks. That's not the floor. Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and I'm pretty shocked by this, he lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on the stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he can do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that. Because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News.
Okay, so we're almost done here. And then I'll be giving the other Washington Journal as well.
Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that too has gotten harder with Kamala because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me to pray for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you.
Okay, so let's hop right in here and get our closing analysis. So I'm going to first start with my digital clone. It sounds ridiculous to say thank you, TJ Walker clone, but it is my clone. It didn't get to watch all of that, but I am going to see, and I don't know what it's going to say, that we're doing this live here. I'm going to see if it does have an overall assessment. Then I'm going to give you my assessment of how this whole debate went. So we're going to put this on for the last time. And I want to thank you for joining me. We did extend this by about 100% longer than watching the debate live. Okay.
That's exciting.
TJ, here's what I want you to do now. We spent a lot of time tonight watching the vice presidential debate, Governor Tim Walz versus Senator J.D. Vance. Based on everything you saw, give us your final assessment of both candidates. And if you had to pick on points, who would you say won tonight's debate? Give us your honest assessment. TJ, did you hear me? Can you give me your assessment of the debate from everything you've seen tonight, and who do you think won? Okay, well, it turns out that even clones can get tired. I think it wasn't quite able to play back from everything in its memory database of what it saw earlier. It needed to have it instantly. So apologies for that. So it's been a little bit of an experiment tonight. I'm giving you my opinions, my analysis as a live person, and we've been getting feedback from the clone as well. I hope, Carrie, you've enjoyed it. Flexi, Gershwin, Henry, and others who've stopped by, thanks so much for doing so. I want to give you my honest assessment of this. It was an interesting debate for political junkies in that it was such a contrast from what we've seen in other presidential debates lately. It was fairly genteel, polite, restrained. Both men spent a lot of time saying they agreed with the other person, respected with the other person. We haven't heard a lot of that. So its impact on our political culture, at least to the extent that it de-escalated some of the hatred, probably a good thing. Overall assessment, is this debate going to change much of the political trajectory of either party? No, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact. But in fairness, very few vice presidential debates have ever had much of an impact on the final election count on election day. So nothing particularly unusual there. It can have an impact on that particular candidate's long-term career and how they are perceived. Let's look at this from another standpoint. How do the supporters of each candidate feel their guy did tonight? I think the supporters of J.D. Vance were extraordinarily happy. He did everything he needed to do. He came across as likable, friendly, defended his nominee, defended himself in a way where he didn't seem defensive, was extraordinarily articulate. I think a fair-minded person, even if they don't like his politics, would say, this guy is as articulate as Pete Buttigieg is for the Democrats. Arguably, maybe not quite at the level of a Bill Clinton as far as emotional connection, but clearly extraordinarily articulate and able to articulate complex issues using simple language that's very understandable. So I think his supporters are very happy. A lot of Tim Walz supporters are also happy. They feel like he was himself and came across as a nice guy and hit a lot of his points. So I don't think his supporters are disappointed with him. I don't think either candidate really loses stock within their particular party or with their main nominee. Now, let's not beat around the bush any longer. I think on points, J.D. Vance won. He just came across as more positive, never defensive. He hit his points well. I thought he hit the Democratic nominee harder. He put Walz on the defense more. He simply looked more comfortable. He looked more confident. He looked more presidential or vice presidential, arguably, than Tim Walz did. And I don't think that he really suffered any blows. And I thought he did a good job of putting Walz on the defensive. Now let's look at Walz. Not a bad job. This is not going to harm his political career. It's not going to get him kicked off the ticket. But I don't think he hit Walz nearly as strongly as he could have. He should have really hit hard, specifically by name, the political officers who died from September 6th insurrection and tried to make that a much bigger issue. He did point out, September 6th was not a Facebook ad, but he didn't really connect the rejection of the election results with actual death, which is something that's not happened in the United States before. So I thought he did not hit as hard as he could have. He also just was not as articulate. His sentences didn't flow. His body language, looking up and down and looking around and kind of having to frown, just did not give people as good of an impression of him and did not convey confidence. So not a knockout. I do not think that this debate is going to sway many voters at all. But on points, I play it, I give it to you straight. I do think J.D. Vance won this debate in the sense that any debate can be won where there isn't a clear-cut blunder that someone made. No one made any horrific blunders here. Nobody made a knockout punch, but on points, I have to go with J.D. Vance. I'm TJ Walker. Thanks for joining me. If you have questions about this, if you're watching it on demand, if you have disagreements, post them right here. If you got anything of value out of what my clone said, let me know. If you thought it was just a cheap, stupid gimmick, you can let me know that too. If you're interested in making clones yourself, you may want to check out my new book. Let me just put it there so it's in focus. Building an interactive AI video phone, now available on Amazon in Kindle version, paperback, and hardback, and soon audio version as well. I'm TJ Walker. Thanks so much for watching.